welcome to Let's Talk About, a series spotlighting leaders, artists, authors, marketers, creators, entrepreneurs sharing tips and tricks and advice on business, media, technology, and frankly, life itself. I'm your host, Cynthia Nelson, three-time entrepreneur, Forbes contributor, investor, and advisor. Today, we're talking to the amazing James Nord, the founder of Fohr. James, thank you and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
I really want to understand your background. How did you get where you're at? You've got an amazing company. I mean, I'm just going to caveat this with you've been in the creator economy before. There was a name for the freaking creator economy. I
hmm
mean, we're talking 2012, but tell me your background and history and how did you actually start for?
Yeah, absolutely. So it started from a Tumblr account. I started a Tumblr early in the platform. I was interested in photography. I got on some staff recommends list at Tumblr. My following grew. I ended up being one of the most followed people on Tumblr in the early internet days. And I'm from Georgia. I was living in New York City. I wanted to shoot fashion photography. I didn't know anyone in that world. So I just started cold emailing like the CEOs of Prada and Gucci and
Just small,
Versace.
tiny,
Yeah,
tiny companies.
tiny.
Just tiny.
And let me say, it did not work. Nobody ever responded to me. And so I was really frustrated. I ended up meeting someone at Tumblr who introduced me to the Oscar de la Renta team. They needed someone to shoot something. So that was my first paid gig ever. I shot something for Oscar and my life like fairly quickly changed after that. And I started to get all these kind of cool opportunities. None of them really paid, but like I was shooting cool stuff. I was getting
Yeah,
entry into this world that I
yeah,
that I felt I didn't have access to. Not because I was an amazing photographer, but because I had this big following, and brands were starting
right.
to get interested in reaching that community. And I went on a the first blogger trip ever with Puma. They sent us to Abu Dhabi to shoot a yacht race. And coming back from that, um, I I felt like we had maybe stumbled upon this new kind of marketing, and I had a couple of friends that were making money off of their blogs, but they were
hmm
running Google ads on them,
hmm
and
hmm
there was just these ad networks that were placing ads, and I thought the actual posts should be the ad. We were there for a week shooting Puma's yacht racing team, and I thought
Right, right.
there is no way Puma could have told that story to my followers through traditional advertising,
hmm
And
hmm
so I thought to do that, we need data and analytics. I needed what my friends and me were doing on the internet to sit on a spreadsheet next to every other kind of advertising. I found that we could pull that data from the APIs of the platform. And again, I felt like brands were going to want to find more people like this and they were going to need to know what their following was. And that was kind of how Four started. I built it in 2012. Yeah, this is before, uh, not even the creator economy, but this is
Right,
before the word influencer
right,
existed. This
right,
was this
right.
was a blogger network and analytics platform to start.
It's amazing. I mean, like I said, you were so early in this, but seeing it from the blogger perspective of, again, I think the best point you just made was my constituency, my followers were never going to buy from a
hmm
regular ad campaign.
hmm
They needed to be talked to in a different way and see things, visually in a different way. What today, I mean, we are kind of fast forward to 2025, 13 years later, what makes Ford different than everybody else that's out there? Obviously, you have a ton of data. I love the fact that you got into analytics so early because it's so important as a marketer knows. You've got to be able to capture and measure everything to see how it's actually working. But what makes you guys different today?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I think some of being in it so early, there's obviously, I had the experience of not just growing this company, but growing the industry. For the
Mhm.
first few years, I really had to pitch why you should work with influencers, creators, bloggers,
Right,
whatever we want
right,
to call
right.
them, right? And so I think throughout the last 12 or 13 years, a lot of the the big steps the industry's made, we've had a big hand in making those possible and setting the standards and norms. I think that's really important, especially as things move more quickly. We have this, this history of thought leadership, and not just thought leadership, but like action, right? Like the
Hmm.
ability
Hmm.
to change the way we are operating because
Hmm.
the environment in which we're operating has
Yeah.
changed.
Yeah.
The data is important, right? We have 350,000 creators who've signed up for Four.
Amazing.
Um, we have, connections to their social accounts. We've saved every post that they've made, every interaction that they've received. And
Mhm.
so, there's a depth of knowledge there. We've run over $200 million in campaigns. So we have, payout data, performance data, understanding exactly what is and isn't working, what we should be paying somebody, what performance looks like, what we should get on a dollar per views basis or
Mhm.
clicks or whatever it might be. There's just a kind of depth of information and knowledge there. And ultimately, the only thing that matters from all of that, like a brand doesn't really care unless it translates to how do you make me money or how do you save me money, right?
Right, right,
And
right.
so, for us, we feel like we can beat any past campaign a brand has done. Ultimately, we should be driving more value for their dollar. And we should be doing that more effectively, and we should be able to create more persuasive content that actually has an impact on the bottom line.
I mean, you've worked with a ton of big brands too. So, but Dick's Sporting Goods and Kohl's and Marriott. How are creators today using their influence to help those brands in an authentic way? If you can give an example.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think that the bigger structural thing that's so interesting if we look at advertising like zoomed out is
Yeah,
that increasingly consumers are learning about brands and their products from other people, right? And
right.
that's probably the most fundamental shift in advertising in the last 50 years. Because
Yep.
if you think about the transition from TV and radio to, to the internet to social, it was all the same thing. Take
Yeah.
brand has a story and a message. They are using paid media to get that
Hmm.
message out. They
Hmm.
can
Hmm.
control it completely, right?
Hmm.
Coca-Cola wants you to think about Coca-Cola when you see Santa Claus. They
Hmm.
can spend money to make that happen, right?
Yes.
But now on social, Coca-Cola's lost control of their message, right? It's unhealthy, it's bad for you. They're
Hmm.
a big plastics polluter, right? And
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
brands are having to compete with other, with this community of individuals who are talking about them. And I think
Hmm.
what's it's such an interesting thing because it changes the job of a
Right.
marketer from
Right.
brand storytelling to like curation, right? How do
Yeah.
you encourage other people to tell your story? How do you
Right.
highlight the stories that you really want? How do you make sure you get your consumers talking about you? So, you know, what these creators are doing for these brands is giving them like entree into a part of culture that increasingly they are having a hard time buying their way into, which is a new phenomenon for brands
And frustrating for them.
and frustrating.
And frustrating for them. Right. Getting a seat at the table used to be easy because it's what whoever had the biggest ad spend was able to populate every single channel we saw. But now, and I think also increasingly with a new population, Gen Z, Gen X, millennial, there's a whole set of consciousness of
Hmm.
am I buying a product that actually aligns not only with my taste buds, as we with Coke, or but
Hmm.
with my value set, which is inherently very different at times. And it's very hard, I think, to pin down unless you have authentic creators, influencers, whatever you want to call it, really talking about it in a way that makes sense. And it's not just a paid placement
Yeah,
because you can sniff those out from a mile away.
absolutely. Yeah, and I think that yeah, it's such a different phenomenon, and it's um yeah, we see it like um across the board in these challenger brands. And I think the fact that consumers, yeah, they have so much choice and they can, like I think actually like one of the like downfalls of 2010 to 2020 marketing was too many brands tried to be your friend
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then 2020 happened and people
Yeah.
were like, "Oh, if you're my friend, do you believe the same things as me?" And then they
Yeah.
realized like, "Oh, maybe you don't believe the same things as me. You're not my
Yes.
friend," right?
Yes.
So I think we're having a little shift there. But you're right, like all of a sudden you can feel an emotional connection with the water you drink or the toothbrush you use or the
Right.
toothpaste you use. And why not? Like why I think it's if we're going to be this consumerism driven culture, right?
Right.
Like I think it's actually really powerful if you have more stuff in your life that you actually legitimately like and brands that you want to support. Um, and I do think, yeah, that sets up a really interesting challenge for these legacy brands that have big brand recognition, low brand love.
Right.
Um,
Right.
over the next 10 years, because it poses an existential threat if somebody can come through and, you know, a liquid death or a poppy, can come
I
in.
was just gonna mention Poppy
Yeah,
and Pepsi got really smart. They were super
right.
smart. They're like, yeah, old legacy brand maybe doesn't have everybody knows what it is, but maybe doesn't have the popularity. And they clearly made that acquisition based on, yes, it's a brand that went after an audience we're not going after in a way that we're not doing it, that's
Mm,
culturally relevant, has love for the brand, the kind of love that we'd like. So, and it's different than what we've got. So adding that to our portfolio also makes a lot of sense.
yeah, absolutely.
And it was great,
Absolutely.
great, great. It really interesting acquisition, but I think there's more of those probably to come
Yeah.
because
And I think
building them from the inside is freaking impossible,
yeah,
pretty much impossible in the
right.
big companies.
Yeah. And they tried, right? I mean,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Coke and Pepsi both have tried the probiotic soda
yeah,
I think it I mean, this is true of so many things, right? People think, "Oh, I could just replicate this," right?
yeah.
And what's interesting about that says it speaks to another point that I've been really thinking a lot about, which is distribution. And
Mm-hmm.
if you
Mm-hmm.
think about Coke's like competitive advantage, it's been their product distribution,
Yes.
right? They have a product distribution network that is just
Smart.
unparalleled, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so they have won. But now content distribution becomes the moat,
yeah.
right? That like the fact that Skims and Poppy and you know these brands that have all of this like deep creator love and existing brand
Mm-hmm.
love,
Mm-hmm.
they have so much basically free access to content distribution
Mm-hmm.
that it becomes so expensive for the legacy brands to compete that that they just over time can't. I mean, I heard something recently from TikTok that said, if you want TikTok Shop to work for you, you have to have 60 videos a day published. So that's 22,000 a year, you know. And and like if you look on Four, which
Yeah.
has 350,000 influencers, but is you know a microcosm of the larger creator industry, right?
Right.
We had 12,000 influencers post about Skims in the last year.
Mm-hmm.
So like they are definitely getting hundreds of thousands of millions maybe of videos posts about them a year, most of which they're not paying for.
Right.
Right. But if you
Right.
go to Fruit of the Loom,
Yep. Yeah.
I bet they have a couple hundred.
Yeah.
How do
Oh,
you compete?
Max,
How do
Max.
you compete? And
And
Skims,
they over architect everything too. They go like
absolutely.
the studio's got to look like this. We've got to do this. They've got to be this. It's not, it doesn't feel brand in motion authenticity. It feels like a creative produced commercial.
Yeah. So I do think content distribution becomes a huge competitive advantage over the next few years, as as ad performance falls and gets
Yeah.
more expensive and
Yeah.
culture gets more and more fractured, and the cost to make things, well, especially in a digital sense, falls. The cost
Yeah.
to make ads falls. Like it,
Yeah.
it becomes about your ability to get your message in front of people cheaply.
Yeah. That brings me to commerce and video commerce. We saw this huge kind of rise in video commerce in China, which is a very unique culture. You know, you're on
Hmm.
one app that's kind of doing everything. It's not like you have 12 different apps on your phone. Um, what do you think of that? There were a lot of predictions, a lot of money invested in video commerce in the US. I started this podcast actually about video commerce. So the
Hmm.
first like 20 episodes really relate to it. This was a couple years ago.
Hmm.
And I've only seen, and when I was originally doing it, I think the first person I interviewed was Brian from Talk Shop Live. And the
Hmm.
first thing he said was, I came out of media and I said, "Oh, good for you.
Hmm.
You're not a tech guy. Good for
Hmm.
you." And I wanted to make video commerce distribution. I wanted to make sure it could be distributed everywhere. So he was the only one that cut deals with Condé Nast and,
Hmm.
Dotdash, Meredith, all of these guys. What do you think? It's kind of had this big rise and everybody was really excited. It kind of had a bubble, and some of the companies are no longer even in the US. What do you think about video commerce for creators and how is that evolving? Are you seeing that in the business?
Hmm. Yeah, look, I mean, I think it can be true that yes, like people got overexcited about how powerful it was in China and didn't understand maybe the cultural differences. Um, but also that like it probably is the future. Like ultimately, as more and more of our lives move online,
Mm,
um, I think it makes sense that like people are going to get more comfortable shopping in these places, right? That like already, I think this is the like the carrot that everyone is chasing is that
right.
like if I feel like every purchase decision I make in my life is influenced and driven by social,
Hmm.
yet for me, basically none of those transactions happen on social.
Hmm.
That there is a, you know, multi-trillion dollar opportunity to like bridge that gap. Now, I think, to your point about kudos coming from media, I think a core misunderstanding sometimes from uh, pure play technologists is a lack of understanding about how consumers make decisions. That like I am wearing this shirt because I saw a menswear guy on Twitter
Hmm.
talk about this Belgian company, Besnard, and 6 months later, when it was Christmas and my mom asked what I wanted, I remembered
Oh yeah.
he posted about them and I went to the site and I sent her the link. Now, Besnard has no idea where that
Right.
purchase came from, right? They
Right.
probably think it was Google.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and and ultimately, I think it's important to try and bridge that gap. I think influencer marketing would be 10 times its size as an industry if that gap was closed. If we got credit for every sale, for every influence, it would be 10 times as big.
Yeah.
Um,
Great.
but that's the core difficulty of advertising, right? I mean, it's amazing the quote is 50 years old. I know that half my advertising doesn't work. The problem is I don't know
I
which
don't know.
half.
I know. I know. It's crazy. I do see it as a growth opportunity, but like who knows who's going to crack the code? TikTok is definitely trying, and everybody else is out there kind of chasing. Um, if you had a crystal ball, what would you say are the biggest kind of growth opportunities in 2025 for creators and advice that maybe you'd give to brands going
Mm,
into 2025, knowing that it's, a little bit of a nutty year to start off. We've
hmm.
got a lot of shaking in the stock market and
Yeah.
also and that's kind of tends to be the time when unfortunately some of those companies pull back on advertising when they should be going all in when other people are
Hmm.
pulling back. But also tariffs. I mean, I know they're concerned about where they're manufacturing and how that's
Hmm.
going to affect them. But if you kind of looked at it holistically, because we've seen these kind of bumps before 2008, 2000, we've seen this kind of we've always come out of it. What are you predicting, and what are you giving your advice to creators and to brands?
Yeah, good question. I mean, yeah, I think it's going to be a rocky year. Ultimately, what we've seen, like, I expect a pullback, but often in the last few downturns, 2020, 2022, um, that pullback has forced brands to look more holistically at their budget, and often, even though they reduce overall budgets, they end up putting more into influencer, you know. And so I think in the medium term, this will probably accelerate the switch to influencer more dramatically because we just have so much legacy thinking, especially at the Fortune 500 big enterprise brands.
Yeah.
So we'll probably expedite that shift since
Mhm.
I would say most advertisers spending over 200 million a year,
Yeah.
influencers 1 to 2%
Yeah. It's
of
small.
spend, where it should be at least five, I'd say, you know.
Yeah.
So I think we'll see that shift. I mean, our message to brands stays pretty consistent, right? That like if this is an existential threat, like if you have to build this muscle and figure out how to get your message out through other people, I think most brands are pissing in the ocean and like patting themselves on the back, you know. But like there are more than a billion users on TikTok and Instagram. The
Yeah.
internet is incomprehensibly vast.
Yeah.
And I think the problem is people think about the internet as their internet, and
Yeah.
they think like, okay, I got my 200 influencers who've posted. They're all the people I like. I feel good about it. But you're missing out on 99.9% of the internet. And I think the the focus for these brands needs to be how do you scale it? And that's not just the paid side, right?
Yeah.
How do
Yeah.
you scale up the paid? How do you figure out what your macro and celebrity strategy is? What are you doing on gifting? How are you activating your customers? I mean, think about like if a brand could just get every customer who bought their product to post about it, they would never have to advertise again.
No. They forget the fly. They talk about the flywheel a lot, but they don't always implement the flywheel,
Yeah. Well, and
right?
part of the flywheel is having a product that people like
Yeah. And then there's
or
that.
love, you know,
Oh,
and I think
exactly. Hopefully
that's
love.
a that's a real challenge as well, I think for modern marketers is that like it, you know, I think it's good for the consumer. It feels like
Hmm.
increasingly it's like best product wins, most
Hmm.
interesting product wins more frequently.
Hmm.
And it's I hope it's pushing brands to make more appealing, compelling stuff and be a more interesting company and add something to culture rather than just trying to take from it and sell to it.
I think the days of that are kind of slowly going away. I think
Yeah.
enough companies have filed bankruptcy, enough companies have had big issues, in their P&Ls, and there was losing shareholder value, that they've got to look within and maybe replace people that have been there a long time and bring in, fresh perspective. I always say, like, if you have a board of directors and you don't have millennials on it, participating in it, or at least advising to it, you're in a big hole because you're
Yeah,
just in this echo chamber of people who look like you, talk like you, think like you do, and always have done it one way. And there's
absolutely.
zero innovation that happens at that point. It's just inertia.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's great advice. And it's scary. Look, I saw, Meta's got the antitrust lawsuit, and I was
Yes,
reading a
yes,
Times article yesterday,
yeah.
and it was like talking about the judge, and then it said like, comma, who has never used one of Meta's products.
Right, right.
And I'm like,
Yeah.
what?
So
Like,
how do you make a
that's
judgment on,
how do you make how do you make a judgment? I think these people, yeah, like so many people in charge. I mean, look, that's the other thing, like, is you think about growth in the influencer space, right? Like a lot of CMOs are going to get fired in the
yep,
next year, I
yep,
assume, just because
yep,
that's what happens to CMOs.
yep. 18 months.
We have not yet had the total like influencer first CMOs join the seat,
Yep,
you know, and that's coming. I think we're
yep,
starting to get like CMOs into seats who came up in social when like early social was really big and people liked following brands. But we
yeah.
haven't had the influx of CMO first or influencer first
First seat.
CMOs. And let me tell you, when they come and they look at those budgets and say, wait, we're
We're doing what?
spending
Yeah,
we're spending $20 million on cinema advertising
yeah.
in movie theaters? Like,
Bec
and we're
because
spending,
why?
yeah, like no. And it's going to be, that's going to be a dramatic shift.
A reckoning, I think,
Yeah.
that needs to happen. But it's a shift that's coming. Technology can't help itself. AI is the other, you know, good, bad, or indifferent. It's here to stay. Everybody needs to learn how to use it, enhance your job, do what you need to do with it, creator or otherwise, and get on with it. Really,
Hmm.
how do companies get a hold of you? Because I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people really interested in talking to you. So,
Yeah.
what's the best way to reach out?
Anyway, James at Fohr.co. You can have my cell phone number. You can find me on Instagram, James
Cell phone's
Nord.
starting to ring, everybody. I know you're going to be calling.
Yeah, James Nord or at Fohr.co on Instagram as well.
And four is FOHR
Fohr.co.
.co. Awesome. James, thank you so much for being on
Real
the
pleasure.
podcast. I really
Yeah, thank you so
appreciate your
much.
time.
Thank you.